You say that you constantly strive to understand things through intellectual efforts. You speak of some of your realizations of spiritual truths, mystical experiences come through something you would define as higher mind. There is a point, a summit at which emotional knowing and the highest form of intellect unite. So there is nothing wrong with that quality of higher mind when it is fluid, shall we say, and capable of integrating intuitive insight. The emotional center is more than just what we know as emotion. It is an instrument of knowing, as Gurdjieff Nicole Uspensky will say. For someone who is intellectually centered, it is important, as with all others, to find some balance, and therefore that which generates that warming of the heart, that emotional energy, such as walking in nature, as you say, needs to become fuel for increasing and strengthening that dimension of your being. It is crucial not to live in the head, because we are holistic beings that need to incorporate all of these elements as part of our experience of truth and reality. This is, of course, the essence of the fourth way, this idea of finding balance in some way, recognizing the imbalance. It could be argued that someone like Uspensky remained imbalanced in his primary focus of the intellectual center, with his charts and graphs and theories. Maurice Nicole brought the higher emotional quality of exploring and understanding the deeper meaning of the teachings of Christ, the esoteric principles that are experienced at an emotional level. Imagery, symbolism, all of these are grasped through that intuitive dimension, and not so much through the intellectual center. You mentioned that you think the person that is mainly situated in the emotional center has a lot less difficulties in prayer and worship. That is a good insight, and precisely what Gurdjieff points out when he speaks of the different ways. The way of the monk is indeed the way that is traveled through the heart and is the religious way. And he says that the way of the yogi is the more intellectual way. And you know that the third way is the way of the fakir, which is the instinctive way, the willpower over the body. And this fourth way is transcendent of them, because it not only seeks balance, but also takes all of that to function in the everyday things of life, so that it requires a capacity to use the centers with a consciousness and intentionality that may not be as present in the other ways, because living in the world requires so much additional creative use of both the friction and the variety and the possibilities that we find there. You say that you constantly re-evaluate the concepts of Christianity. It is critical to understand that the concepts are secondary. They are merely attempts to put words and formulas around mystical experience. Therefore, Christianity is not based on creeds and ideas that were decided on, or stories that were presented as the background for everything. One has to make a quantum leap beyond all of that to enter an experience that is completely other. And so, to use the intellectual center to try to grasp these concepts keeps one at the threshold limits one's possibilities for discovering what is truly there in the revelations to humanity. Revelations that are simply mirrors of what we have inside and can be. When you speak of the Jesus prayer and say that you find that inner silence produces the feeling of God's peace and perfection, in a similar way to mindfulness, and using the Jesus prayer or a mantra to return to that rather than saying the prayer all the time, you are reaching precisely that which the prayer is seeking to accomplish, which is this Hezekiah, this sacred silence, this inner tranquility, which is not merely tranquility, but conscious presence, which is beyond the use of the prayer. Some of the great teachers on these matters have said that the mechanical phase of the prayer, which is saying it whether out loud or inwardly, is only stage one. As Saint Teresa of Avila says, the prayer of quiet is the highest form of prayer. And so everything is a means to lead us to those higher states that we can each experience individually. And it is up to us and our uniqueness and creativity to make use of them in a way that works for us in order to reach that unitive state. You ask about elaborating on the mystical aspects of the Trinity and reference the active, passive, neutralizing forces. Certainly there is a connection between the law of three and the Trinity as cosmic principles, and there are many ways one could make the parallels. But here again we find ourselves with filtering this through an intellectual desire for rational understanding, almost like mathematical equation. If you understand for yourself the dynamic of love, which pours out of itself, which gives of itself by its very nature, you can begin to see that flow of activity which is inherent in the idea of the Trinity, that some have called community of love, but those are just words, to speak of this movement of love which by its very nature reaches out and finds fulfillment, and by going out finds unity. And you can see how the idea of the three persons in that composite creates a, shall we say, hologram of this dynamic which is at the heart of the cosmos and which is mirrored within us, as above, so below. The issue is not understanding the Trinity, the issue is living out that dynamic of existence in which love consciously manifests itself, returns to itself, unifies with the other while giving of itself, and creates a new kind of life.